Hello, welcome, this is Philip. Today we're going to be taking a look at fashion design and just see what we can learn from it in order to be better artists or designers. Oftentimes when we think about fashion, we envision like crazy, weird, abstract, or artsy-fartsy kind of designs. And I get that because in art in general, you also have abstract art, and there's always going to be an abstract side to things. But what I want to do is I want to take a look at the more common side of the industry. There's a lot of similarities and overlap between a fashion designer and a concept artist or a character designer in the entertainment industry. If we look at the definition, for example, it says, fashion design is the art of applying design, aesthetics, clothing construction, and natural beauty to clothing and its accessories. It is influenced by cultural and social attitudes and has varied over time and place. I feel like you could grab that definition and literally apply it to what a concept artist or a character designer does. Because as an artist in general, when you're creating a design character, you're always going to be thinking about design principles, you're going to be thinking about aesthetics, clothing construction, you're going to think how you're going to make the clothing functional, and you're also thinking about cultural influences, whether you're creating something for a fantasy genre or a sci-fi genre, whether you're creating armor or clothing, you're always thinking about how you can create cultural influences into your design to make a seamless world. And so I want to take a look at fashion design because I think it's good to step out of your area and look at different areas to get new and refreshing ideas, and just take a look at fashion design and see what we can learn from it. I like to use Pinterest to gather my collection of references. I just want to take a look at a few examples of these and see what makes them good and see what goes into it. And I think it's important to understand what goes into a design when you're looking at fashion design, because I think design principles and fundamental are very universal for every kind of artist. At the end of the day, you're using design fundamentals to create a good looking end result. And so what I think specifically is going into fashion design are a couple of different principles or elements that are being used. Examples of that could be color, contrast, repetition, shapes, textures, patterns, just to name a few. So if we take a look at our examples, we can have a better understanding of what goes into it. If we take a look at our very first example, from a gamer's point of view, if I look at this, I instantly get a feel like this could belong into an RPG world, right? I really like the bold shapes, the minimalism in colors, the asymmetry. If I look at this, I just feel like this design could fit for a RPG character. And speaking of RPG, if we look at our next example, if I look at this, I instantly see a cleric type character. And if you're a nerd like me, you know that clerics are like the healer type characters that heal characters that are taking the most damage. And I see that because of all the all different kinds of elements that are being used and the colors and the influences. That's what I think is so great about fashion, because as a nerd like me, I look at it and I see all these elements, and I can see something that is really recognizable, but at the same time very different, because it's, in the end of the day, it's fashion, right? And that's what I love about it. If we take a look at the next example, you can see a lot of cultural influence being used, but you can also see like how they use a lot of contrast between the different elements that I mentioned, right? There's a lot of contrast with the big shapes, the cloth, and the detail in the shape versus like a very solid black leather boots. This is one way how you can use the contrast between the elements. One thing that I think is really good specifically about this image is how the interior is enhancing the design, because characters are never like in a vacuum. Characters belong into a bigger created world, and they either fit in or they stand out in that world. And I think that this environment really emphasizes the design even more. And I think it looks really good. If we look at the different example, we see another way how contrast is being used between patterns and textures. For example, if we look at the very puffy jacket versus the very thin cloth, and a different way the contrast is being used is like very solid color of the puffy jacket versus a very high detail pattern in the cloth. As you can see, there's multiple ways how you can apply contrast with the very elements that I mentioned. If we take a look at this example, which is very different, it has more like of a urban feel. You can see again how the same contrast and elements are being used differently. Like for example, the very high detail stripes pattern on the top versus a very solid black pants. There's a contrast there, but there's also repetition as well. Like they added like a very interesting color like orange to break the monotony of the black and white, which I think looks very good. But they just don't use the orange once and that's it. They repeat the orange in very small ways throughout the design. The same way they repeat the black on the cap, and obviously they repeat the white in other areas like the leggings as well. In fashion design they use asymmetry. Like when you use symmetry, for example, you can create something that looks very rigid or something that is very authoritarian, and to contrast that you can have like a very asymmetrical design which can create a very bold and expressive character, or create more intrigue and make a character that's very distinct. If we look at this example where there's another way they use asymmetry but in a very different way, this feels more a lot more elegant, a little bit more royal perhaps, but there's like an asymmetry that creates an instant intrigue, right? There's more like if you imagine a world where there's like a very royal kind of system, and you have one character that is part of all these royal characters, and then you have this asymmetrical character that it instantly makes it feel like it stands out. If we look at a different example, this is completely different. You instantly get like a sci-fi kind of feel from it, and that's because how the shapes are being used. It's very clean, very minimalistic as well. And that's something you see in sci-fi very often, is the minimalism in the way the shapes are being used and the colors that feel very sci-fi to me. If you look at, for example, the Stormtroopers from Star Wars, it has a very similar vibe to this kind of design. So yeah, these are some of the examples that I think are very cool and interesting looking in fashion design. That's gonna be it for now. I really hope you enjoyed this. I'm gonna be making more videos around this topic. In my next video, I'm going to create my own character design using fashion design references, so stay tuned for that. This is gonna be it for now, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!